Hello, and welcome to today's episode of 219 GreenConnect, where we explore topics about the environment and green living in Northwest Indiana. For past show archives, news, and upcoming events, you can check out our website at 219greenconnect.com or connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We are also now on Pinterest.com, and you can subscribe to our podcast via iTunes. Listeners to our live show today can phone in at 805-243-1323 to post questions, or you can listen to the archive later. I'm Kathy Sipple. I'm your host, and with me today I've got Paul Quinlan from the Shirley Heinze Land Trust. And Paul is the Stewardship Director. Did I get your title correct?
That's right.
Okay, well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about the work that Shirley Heinze Land Trust is involved in.
Okay, well, Shirley Heinze is a land trust, so we acquire land and hold it for the public in perpetuity. Our interest is in preserving natural areas in northwest Indiana. We operate in Lake Porter and LaPorte counties, and to date we've acquired about 1,200 acres, or protected about 1,200 acres of natural areas that range from prairies to savannas to forests and wetlands. Most of it we own outright, fee simple. Our board decided that was the way that we would mostly work. We also do own some conservation easements, which are basically the development rights to parcels. So the landowner still owns the land and can sell it, but there's certain restrictions on the land so that it can't be developed or converted to other uses than its native natural habitat that it has on it. We also acquire land to cooperate with the National Lakeshore and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. Because we're a private group, we're able to do land acquisitions a little faster than the bureaucratic government. So we acquire land for our partners sometimes and then hold on to it and transfer it to them when they're able to get all the pieces in place to have that happen.
Great. Well, that sounds like a good overview. So I've got a couple questions for you just based on that opening statement. You mentioned, easements as an alternative to owning property fee simple, and I just want to make sure fee simple, that means you own the deed and you're the owner. Just want to make sure we're using terms everybody.
That's right. Yeah, you own the
okay.
deed. You own that outright, often like the way people own their house and the lot that the house is on. It's a deed for it. That's it. Conservation easement is be a little similar to some people have an access easement so that they can cross another person's property to get to their property. Well, this is a conservation easement. The point of it is to conserve some natural feature of the land. And so a third party, usually a land trust, would hold the title to those development rights, basically, or hold the conservation easement, which has its own deed. And outlines what's allowed to occur on the property. So it lowers the value of the land in terms of like selling it, because you can't just sell it and subdivide it and put a bunch of houses on it. But it's a way of protecting the land in perpetuity.
And there are tax benefits to that for the landowner, is that correct?
There are, yes. The difference between the value of the land without the easement and the value of the land with the easement on it is allowed to be used for tax deduction purposes.
Okay, great. Well, that's a great overview. And then you mentioned partners that you work with, and I'm just curious if you can mention, some of the partners that you do work with. Sure.
We have a lot of really good partners around here. The federal government, the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. We partner with them on certain projects. We work with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, particularly with their Division of Nature Preserves, because 5 of our properties are also state-dedicated nature preserves. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. We work with the Nature Conservancy. They have a local program office that is focused on maintaining and improving Carner blue butterfly habitat in the dune and swale region. We also cooperate with Save the Dunes and some other local land trusts, such as LaPorte County Conservation Trust, to acquire land and plan how to best conserve large areas of land so that we can all work efficiently and effectively together to achieve our common goals.
Right, and I'm sure a lot of people listening may already know, why it's so important to conserve land, but I'll just ask about some of the things that I know, or I'll start with some of those. I mean, some species, either animals or plants, they need a certain critical mass of land to really successfully procreate. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, they need the habitat in which to live and reproduce, or else that population of that species is going to disappear from that area. And so by acquiring the habitat and managing it and keeping it healthy, we're providing that habitat for a variety of plants and animals and insects, and the whole web of life that lives there.
Right. And then I'd imagine, other reasons are just to make sure that we don't become a completely paved over, area for stormwater management and all kinds of reasons. It's a good idea to have wide expanses of green space. Yep.
And so there's the services, provided by just open space around us, and so preserving wetlands, that's a way to have some storage space, natural storage space for stormwater runoff, and then the plants that grow there filter the pollutants that get into that runoff, so it improves water quality. And also just having we get into managing the plant community to make sure that it's diverse, because a diverse community is a sustainable community. If it's more diverse, there's several species there filling the various niches, doing their jobs in the little local ecology, then there's more ability for that system to withstand any threats that come along. Like if there's a drought some year, or some disease comes and wipes out one of the species, there'll be other species there that play the role.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't help butting in there for a minute, but you mentioned drought, and we've definitely been challenged with that kind of thing this year, so even more important. And then, I'll say, too, this is probably an obvious one, but just the sheer enjoyment that it provides for people, to bird watching or do nature photography or whatever other kinds of things. So are we missing any other key benefits that are important?
I'm sure there's some we're not mentioning, but yeah, it improves the quality of life to have green space around you. All of our sites are open to the public. Several of them have an actual developed trail system that people can go on and do, what we call non-consumptive recreation, hiking and bird watching and photography and things like that. And it provides, just the services that the environment provides, like the stormwater management, like we said. Also, just the plants themselves. I've been talking a lot to people on hikes lately about how providing that habitat is important for the wider ecosystem. As if you remember back to grade school biology, flowers need to be pollinated to create seeds and the fruit that grows on them. So in the case of like apple orchards, they need bees to come in and pollinate the flowers so that we can have apples. And that's that's sort of an agricultural setting. But a lot of those crops are also pollinated by native insects and not just honeybees. And so those native insects need other places to live during the rest of the year when the apples aren't in bloom. And so having natural areas to complement our managed sort of agricultural, intensively managed lands complements that and makes our agricultural systems a little more resilient as well.
Right.
People know about how honeybees have been in decline lately, so it's good to have a backup plan.
Sounds like a very good plan. Yeah, I mean, I obviously I'm not an expert in this area such as you are, but I have heard a little bit about some theories as to why the bees are on the decline, and it seems that they're a little bit stressed with these sort of monoculture situations where they are really trying to do a lot in a short time with one type of crop, and so this other, as you say, kind of rest or respite area where they can go during the off season is
right.
Very, very important.
Yep.
Well, look, if you're just joining us, again, my name is Kathy Sipple, and this is 219 GreenConnect. My guest today is Paul Quinlan from the Shirley Heinze Land Trust, and I'd like to just give a few websites and other ways that you can connect with Shirley Heinze so that you can find out about the great programs that they offer and the nature preserves that we're talking about. So, Paul, do you want to give out that information?
Sure. Our website is www.heinzetrust.org, and Heinze Trust is all one word, and it's HeinzeTrust.org. They can also find us on Facebook. Just search for Shirley Heinze Land Trust, and we're also on Twitter.
And that is Heinze Trust as well.
Right.
Great. Good. And I see you do have all kinds of different programs going on. It looks really interesting. You've got volunteer opportunities. You do hikes. Tell us a little bit about the programs and also your personal role. What do you do on a typical week or month?
Me? As a stewardship director, I kind of oversee the management and restoration of the nature preserves. I get I apply for grants so that we can do projects to, do a big Savannah Restoration project or control invasive plants on some of our properties, reestablish native plants in areas that have been degraded. So I oversee a crew of people that go out and do that work. I coordinate with our volunteer manager who recruits volunteers to come out and help us accomplish our work. I also lead some hikes on many weekends, it seems like. We have several hikes throughout the year for people to attend. We do have volunteer work days at least once a month. Sometimes there's more than one. Different groups come to us or different opportunities come up to have additional work days. There's workday information on our website. I consult with our land strategy committee when we're looking at land that we're interested in purchasing to decide whether it makes sense for Shirley Heinze to own it and manage it or how best to go about that. I guess that's it.
How do you decide what would make a good candidate for land acquisition? What are some of the criteria that you would use?
Well, a criteria, we kind of have a strategic sort of plan for land acquisition, and primarily the first step is adding to nature preserves that we already have and trying to expand the size of those protected natural areas, whether it's an area that Shirley Heinze owns or an area that's adjacent to the National Lake Shore or to a division of nature preserves, a state-owned nature preserve. That would make a parcel of land higher priority for protection. Also, if it's a new site where there's not already a nature preserve there, it would have to be large enough to be feasible to manage it as a nature preserve and provide a meaningful amount of habitat for the plants and animals that would live there. So usually it varies and it depends on the system, but usually a minimum of 10 acres for a brand new site to be able to expand from there. We're trying to add to preserves, and we do look for areas that have that are important in the landscape. Either they have some rare plant populations on them, or they help to protect water quality in a particular watershed, or they'll preserve like some forested tracts because forests are getting rare on the Valparaiso Moraine. So areas like that is what we tend to focus on.
Great. And so on these volunteer work days, I see you've got one coming up this Saturday. And can you tell me a little bit about, what would the volunteer experience be like? Do people need to have any special skills, or what type of work would the volunteers be able to do?
Nope, they don't need any special skills at all. When you come out, we'll train you on anything you need to do that day. Depending on your comfort level, we'll give you a power tool or whatever we might be using that day, or just have you haul brush for us. So there's a variety of things that go on all the time. This weekend will be a little less work and a little more of a demonstration of a project that we've been doing at Ambler Flatwoods. We recently added an additional 150 acres to the property to increase its size to 350 acres. And we've been doing a project that's funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Sustain Our Great Lakes grant program to remove invasive species and restore a few house sites that had been on the property, and we're trying to make them more natural and improve the health of the property. So we'll be leading people on a tour of the work that we've been doing out there. We've had a couple of interns working for us this summer implementing the project, and so it's a way to show off what we've been doing, but also to try to foster stewardship of the surrounding forest lands that the neighbors own, whether they're interested in preserving it as a nature preserve someday or not. If they can manage the habitat that they have to improve the quality and the health of it, then that really benefits the landscape and the nature preserve that we own as well.
Sure, I could see a good synergistic relationship forming there. It, almost extends the land trust without the formal ownership.
Right, right.
Well, I see on other volunteer days you've got different types of work, like Savannah Restoration, Prairie Restoration and Burning, Exotics Control. Can you tell us maybe about some other volunteer opportunities throughout the year? What is involved with those other types of...
Sure. A lot of our other volunteer work days, particularly in our region, we have a lot of sites that are savannas and prairies, and those are fire-dependent communities. Historically, they used to burn every few years to keep back the brush from growing and keep it an open, sort of sunny aspect sort of site. And so since we've built roads and houses and everything around these properties, they haven't seen fires much over the last 100 years as they did historically. So they've gotten a little overgrown with woody species. So we've been doing a lot of work on some of our properties to restore the structure of these sites. So we'll be removing excess trees and brush from sites that are normally more open and grassy and full of wildflowers. And so we'll cut the brush and or trees, haul them off of the site, either burn them or chip them. The trunks of larger trees get cut up and we give those away as firewood. And so people can do anything from, learn how to operate a chainsaw under our direct supervision, to dragging brush, to burning a brush pile. We also do controlled burns on our properties after we do that initial clearing. And so we have a couple of work days coming up where people can help us clear fire breaks so that we can contain the controlled burn when we do it later in the fall. So that's basically just mowing a real wide trail around a property and removing all the extra hazards that surround a burn unit so that we'll be able to burn that safely. We also do seed collection on some of our properties. We collect seed from the higher quality areas to use on more degraded areas to improve the health of the plant community. So that's always a popular event. People come out and collect seed and get to learn what these plants look like after they've bloomed and see what they look like pretty much in the dormant season. So that's some other work that we do.
Well, that sounds great. I know I'm a big fan of taking pictures when I'm on hikes, especially up at the dunes. And I'll admit, often I'm just taking pictures of things and I really don't know, what they are. I just think they're intriguing, and we are just, so blessed, really, to have such a diverse, variety of plants in our area. So that would be fascinating. And then Savannah Restoration, what exactly does that involve?
Typically, on the sites we've been working on, we have two kinds of savannas under our ownership. We have black oak savannas in the more sandy areas up by the dunes. And as you go south from there, you get into some clay soils. Particularly, there's a site in Hobart called Bur Oak Woods, and it's on this clay loam soil, and it has bur oak trees growing there instead. Both bur oak and black oak are fire tolerant, and so historically they would have burned, those sites would have burned, and these oak trees with the real thick bark, once they get to a certain size, they can survive a fire that comes through. So you would tend to see a lot more oak trees and very few ash and maple and cherry trees, which have very thin bark. And so typically the areas that have gotten overgrown have grown up in those fire-intolerant species. So we spend a lot of time removing those so that we can have more of the oak regeneration as well as just the open, sunny, a lot of sunlight getting to the ground so that we can have the grasses and wildflowers that you normally find in a savanna.
Great. And then I'm wondering, too, one of the topics is called exotics control. Is that kind of the same thing as invasive species, or would that be something different?
Yeah, sort of. A lot of times those words get interchanged, and they should be a little more specific. Plenty of plants are exotic to North America, but not all of them are invasive. So Usually the invasive ones we're focusing on do happen to be exotic or non-native, but I suppose I should really say invasive species control. So we spend some time controlling plants like purple loosestrife, hybrid cattail, common reed grass, which grows along the roadside ditches, that real tall grass with the big plume on top. Those are all real aggressive species that aren't, the purple loosestrife and the common reed are not native here, and so they're kind of out of their natural systems. So they have no natural checks and balances to keep them in their place, as it were, and behaving within the ecosystem. So they grow really aggressively and outcompete all the native species, so that you end up having a wetland that has just 4, 5, 6 species in it instead of 50 to 100 species.
Right. Well, I think Phragmites is one I've heard of. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
And also garlic mustard.
Grass.
Okay, that's the
garlic
same thing.
mustard too,
Gotcha.
in forests. Yep. There's some areas where it's taken over completely, but there's some areas where if it's just invading an area, you do well to keep it out of that area.
Okay. This may be, I don't want to open a can of worms here, but I'm just wondering, if somebody familiarizes themselves with what these things look like, is it encouraged on a hike to remove them, or is that really best done under the tutelage of a volunteer work day?
Well, depending on the species, if it's garlic mustard and they're on a hike, they can pull that, and that's usually an okay way to control it if there's a few plants. Sometimes we have to use herbicide. Usually we use herbicide for a lot of these plants. Unfortunately, it's the most effective way to remove them and control them and keep them out of there. So what we tend to do is we'll use backpack sprayers. It's just 3 gallons of an herbicide solution on your back, and you spray it to the foliage of the plant. The timing of that is really important, because there's certain times of year when plants are more vulnerable to the damage from the herbicide, and so sometimes if it's the wrong time of year, you can apply herbicide and you won't be hurting the plant at all. Or sometimes if you're pulling, there's also an invasive plant called sweet clover around here, and if you're not careful to pull the entire root out, if the root breaks off, the plant can actually resprout and you'll be back where you started from.
Oh boy.
there's a little more nuances to controlling the species than just removing them, but that's where we hope.
I figured that was probably the case, and that's why I figured I would just ask and see what was advised. But it sounds like coming out on a work day would certainly give you
absolutely, because we explain all that to our folks when they come out, and so they can learn the best way to control it, and then hopefully go back and do it on their own properties or find other natural areas that they can start managing on their own. Great.
Well, I'm just going to pause again for a little identification. If you're just joining us, this is Kathy Sipple with 219 GreenConnect, and my guest today is Paul Quinlan, Stewardship Program Manager at Shirley Heinze Land Trust. And so we're talking about the programs that you offer, some specific lands that you manage, and all kinds of good things. So what other programs do you do besides the hikes and the work days?
Another real important program that we just started a couple of years ago is the Mighty Acorns, and what it is an environmental education curriculum geared for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students. And what it is there's a lesson plan that coincides with the fall, winter, and spring seasons, and so there's a lesson that's taught at those 3 times during the school year, and each lesson is associated with a field trip out into some local nature preserve. And so in this case, we've been working with the Hobart and Portage school systems to have some of their classes. The teachers teach the classroom portion of the lesson, and then they come out to our nature preserves or to a Portage city park to do activities out in the field related to what they learned in the classroom. So they're learning about the food chain and invasive species and disturbance and habitat and all kinds of things about ecology. And they get to see it in action and, a real-life example of it out on their local nature preserve that's right in their own community. So they get to see that it's not just an abstract concept from a textbook. They can see that habitat for a squirrel is this oak tree right out in the park next to their house. So, and they get to see it change through the seasons too. And ideally, a class would start in 4th grade, and then they would continue the program in 5th grade and have more advanced lessons and come out. A portion of the field trip is devoted to stewardship work, so they actually come out and remove invasive species or collect seeds and things like that to help manage the property and improve the health of the ecosystem there.
Well, that
so
sounds
that
great.
Is a hands-on approach.
Yeah, well, especially starting them so young, it probably encourages them to, be good stewards of the land throughout their life, and then they may spread that back within their household and encourage interest if other family members haven't been exposed to it. Mm-hmm. So I can see that being effective on a lot of levels.
Right. That's our hope, is to train the next generation and make them appreciate the natural world that we really depend on.
Yeah, well, I always like to ask, too, because, obviously you're representing Shirley Heinze, but, you're you, and I'm just always curious with the people that I speak with on the radio show, what got you interested initially in the environment? Did you go to a Mighty Acorns program or the equivalent thereof, or what got you?
We did, kind of. In 5th grade, I'm from New York State, and in 5th grade we went to the Department of Natural Resources there ran an environmental, like an outdoor classroom and environmental education center. And we went there and caught frogs and tadpoles and learned about the things we're teaching the kids in the Mighty Acorns program. So that always kind of stuck with me. And in addition to that, my family used to go camping and canoeing in the Adirondack Mountains. So it was just on a recreational level, I was surrounded by all this. And I don't know, I used to watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, so when I was real small.
I've got this song in my head, thank you.
Yep.
Can still remember.
So that just kind of stuck. And, by the time I got to college and needed to pick a career path, I knew that I liked biology, and I decided to study ecology. And I just really enjoy being out in nature and, trying to be involved with it and give back to it, I guess.
Well, that's great. It's interesting you say that. I actually majored in economics, and you'd think, well, what does that have to do with the environment? But I found myself drawn to every environmental class I could take. I took the economics of sustainable forestry, the economics of sustainable fishing, all kinds of things. But, really the environment is at the core of everything, we do. If we don't have that, we don't have a whole lot else. So I'm very glad for organizations such as yours and for experience that you bring, to help make our area just a more healthy and vibrant, sustainable place to live. So I need to ask one other thing, too. On your website, I saw a really cool-looking poster. And is that something that you guys sell? Is that a fundraiser? Or tell us a little bit.
I believe we have a few of those left. That was made.
Okay.
It was a commissioned South Shore style, a South Shore Railroad poster. We had a local artist, Barb Labus, design it and draw it, and it shows several layers of Northwest Indiana, and so it shows there's these layers showing our different properties, the different habitats that occur in Northwest Indiana, interspersed with railroads and industry and the lake shore and things. So it's a really unique concept. We had that created for our 30th anniversary last year, and I believe we do have still a few copies left for sale.
I better order mine soon before I make a big deal about it.
Yep.
Well, it looks really cool, and I think that's, I like that the artist incorporated everything that we do have going on here, because we're not just, a natural environment in a vacuum. We do have industry, we do have railroads, and we just need to, embrace that and, work out the best that we can. So we're coming near the end of our time, but Paul Quinlan, I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I hope you'll come back and tell us more about future programs and updates that you've got going on with Shirley Heinze. Sure. Just once again, some ways that listeners can connect with Shirley Heinze and find out about more programs and volunteer opportunities is to go to their website, which is www.heinzetrust.org, or you can also find them on Facebook or Twitter. So this is Kathy Sipple. We're signing off with another episode of 219 GreenConnect, and thank you for joining us.